Hello and welcome back to this course of videos on MongoDB. Now in this video we're going to continue walking through the code for this shoe store app. Now I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the front-end code because that isn't the aim of these videos. This is back-end and database we're looking at. However, I do want to quickly address the front-end code that I'm using, and I've basically using a SPA framework, which stands for Single Page Application. And I just want to show you that quickly before we progress on. As I mentioned previously, as I navigate between these different pages, you can see that I'm just using hash navigation. And what happens is on the initial page download, when we request our index.php. Index.php is basically contains all three pages. If I go here, these three separate pages are all contained on index.php, and the way that they're just separated by I've just put by divs with a class of page. So div with a class of page and div with a class of page. That's my three pages. And the way we're navigating between those pages is actually quite simple. If we go to the nav bar here, this UL here, this nav bar represents these three LIs in the nav bar. And you can see that for the href, I am just using hash navigation here. For the href, I'm doing hash home, hash register, hash about, which is exactly what you see as I navigate between the three. Now, each time the hash changes through clicking these buttons and clicking these A tags, this particular event listener is triggered here, window.onHashChange. This event listener is triggered every time the hash changes here. And what we do is every time the hash changes, I'm running this render function here and passing this hash in here. So if we look at the render function, again, it's pretty simple. It's basically just a switch statement, and depending upon the hash key that you pass in, so the hash key I'm passing in here is hash register, and hash register, all it's doing is unhiding the part of index.php that is related to registration. This is a registration page here. So that is all it's doing. That is how we create our single page application. Index.php downloads the entire three pages, and then as we use an event listener called onHashChange, so each time we change the hash, we show and hide accordingly, just to show the particular section of index.php that represents the page that we want to show. So that is how a SPA framework works in its very simplest form. So now let's have a look at what happens when a user populates this registration form and hits submit. If I go back to my index.php, you can see here's my form here. My regular HTML form starts there and ends here, which is this registration form here. I mean, it is a standard HTML form. However, you can see we're not using it like a regular HTML form. Actually, my submit button, well, my register button is outside of the form, because we're not going to use the standard HTML functionality to submit our data to our PHP server. We're going to use Ajax instead. And the reason we're going to use Ajax is, as we mentioned before, this is a single page application. We want to avoid full page refreshes at all costs. And if this was a standard HTML form that we all know and love, and we submit an HTML form, as you know, it performs a full page refresh, and that is against what we're trying to achieve in terms of the SPA framework. So instead, when we hit submit, we're going to pass the data from this form to our PHP server and populate our Mongo and MySQL databases using Ajax. And you'll see that when we move over to our JS file to look at what happens. So when we look at the click event for the BTN register, we can see over here, here's our BTN register. You can see there's our prevent default. This is preventing the form using its default behavior and sending off a post request to the server and then doing a full page refresh once the form is submitted. We don't want that. So we prevent the default. But what we're doing here is we are first of all collecting all the data from the form, and we're putting it, so we're collecting all the users, the information from the form, and then we are creating this JavaScript object here called payload, which has a number of key value pairs. Now this JavaScript object is what we're going to use, and we're going to pass this to our PHP server via Ajax. That's going to happen when we hit that submit button. There's a few things here. There's an if statement where if these three key fields are empty, we're just going to generate this warning here. This you'll see is important later. As you can see, we have two email address fields. Now in MySQL, we're going to store them as separate records in the MySQL database, but in MongoDB we're going to store that as an array. So what we're actually going to do here is, before we add our data to our payload JavaScript object here, we're going to concatenate these two emails into an array, and then so this is an array here. The value of this key value pair within this JavaScript object is an array, and that's going to be passed via Ajax. So as some of you will recognize from this Ajax statement here, we are using jQuery. In the future, it looks like everybody's going to be using the Fetch API when that is fully implemented on all browsers. For now, my personal opinion is jQuery is the best way and most efficient way to write Ajax. So here's our Ajax method that we're using here, and within here we are passing a number of key value pairs. The first thing, ignore put for the moment, we are doing a post request. The URL is going to be register PHP, that is a target. Register PHP is another, is this PHP file that we have here. The data, you can see what we're doing here. The data is going to be our payload, and we're actually passing a key value pair. So the key is data key, and the value is our JavaScript object payload, but using the JSON.stringify method. Now JSON.stringify, really all it does, it's pretty straightforward. It pretty much just takes your JavaScript object, turns it into a JSON object by putting quotations around the keys and the values. I mean, there's more to it than that, but in its basic sense, that's what it does, because you can't pass a JavaScript object over the wire. You can only pass a string over the wire. So this is why it's stringifying it and turning it into a JSON object so we can post that data. So that's the data key value pair. And then success, this is what's going to be called when we actually get a 200 OK response from our PHP server. So we are going to, before we look at the success event handler here, which is what this is, we are going to go over and look at our register PHP to actually see the PHP code, the backend code that will run when we hit our when we populate our data and we hit our submit. But we're coming towards the 10-minute mark right now, so I'm going to end it here, and we can look at the register.php data and finish off this registration page on the next video, and look forward to seeing you then.